In the winter of 1947, deep in the cold valleys of Montana, a man was dragging a strange metal structure along a frozen trail toward his homestead. That man was Earl Hutchkins, a 34-year-old former Army engineer who had taken his discharge pay and bought a small piece of land surrounded by pine forests and mountains. The men at the trading post laughed when they saw what he was hauling. The curved sheets of corrugated steel were parts of a military surplus Quonset hut, the kind normally used for storage depots and army barracks. But Earl Hutchkins had a different plan. Hidden among the tall pines on his land stood a simple log cabin. It was well built by frontier standards. The walls were made of thick spruce logs, resting on a solid stone foundation with a steep roof designed to shed heavy snow. Yet, during the previous winter, Earl had learned a brutal truth. A tight cabin is a myth. No matter how carefully the logs were fitted together, the wind always found a way in. Cold air slipped through the smallest cracks. Frost formed along the inside walls. His daughters, Ruth and Clara, slept wearing heavy coats. Every evening, his wife Margaret stuffed cloth into gaps along the walls and floors. By morning, those cloth strips were frozen solid. Inside the cabin, the temperature rarely climbed above 45 degrees. The stove burned constantly, yet the warmth seemed to vanish as quickly as it was created. Earl soon realized the problem wasn't poor construction. The problem was physics. Heat escapes through three different forces. The first is conduction, when warmth moves through solid materials like wood or stone. The second is convection, when moving air strips heat away from surfaces. The third is radiation, when heat slowly escapes into the cold night sky. Frontier cabins lose warmth through all three at the same time. But in Montana's mountain valleys, the most powerful enemy was wind. The wind didn't just chill the air, it literally pulled heat out of the walls faster than the stove could replace it. And the wind in that valley never stopped. Then, Earl remembered something from his time in the Army. During the war, he had worked in the Aleutian Islands building Quonset barracks on frozen ground. Those thin metal huts could stay surprisingly warm with only a small stove. Not because metal was a good insulator, but because their curved shells blocked the wind almost completely. That memory sparked an idea. What if he could stop the wind before it ever reached the cabin walls? In October of 1947, the Army Depot in Great Falls began selling surplus Quonset huts for $75. Earl bought one immediately. He hauled the metal pieces home across the frozen trail. His plan sounded ridiculous to everyone who heard it. Instead of living inside the Quonset hut, Earl would build it over his cabin, leaving a 2-foot air gap between the steel shell and the wooden walls. The metal would block the wind, the air gap would trap still air around the cabin, and still air is one of nature's best insulators. By late October, the strange structure began to take shape. Curved steel ribs rose over the cabin like a giant metal skeleton. Corrugated panels were bolted into place, forming a curved shell above the roof. The cabin now stood inside a protective metal arch. From the outside, it looked strange, almost like a barn had swallowed a house. Neighbors shook their heads. Some laughed openly. One man called it a tin coffin. Even a county extension agent warned Earl the design might trap moisture and damage the cabin. But Earl ignored the criticism. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply trying to keep his family warm. Then, December arrived, and with it came one of the coldest winters Montana had seen in decades. Temperatures dropped to negative 38 degrees. For more than 3 weeks, the thermometer never climbed above zero. Families burned wood day and night. Most cabins struggled to stay above 40 degrees indoors. Water buckets froze solid indoors. Livestock died in the fields. Smoke poured constantly from cabin chimneys as families fought to keep their homes warm. But then, people began to notice something unusual. The Hutchkins cabin produced very little smoke. One afternoon, a trapper riding past saw Earl outside calmly splitting wood, and he was doing it wearing nothing but a flannel shirt. Soon, word reached the trading post. Calvin Drecker, the local sawmill operator, decided to see the place for himself. When he arrived, Margaret opened the airlock door. As Drecker stepped inside, he felt a wave of warmth. The cabin was comfortable, not just barely warm, actually comfortable. He looked at the thermometer hanging on the wall. It read 63 degrees. Outside, the temperature was nearly -35. The children sat at the table doing schoolwork. None of them were wearing coats. Drecker stood silently, unable to believe what he was seeing. Soon, the county extension agent returned with an official thermometer to verify the claim. He measured the temperature carefully. Outside, it was -35 degrees. Inside, it was 64. Nearly a 100-degree difference. But the most shocking discovery came from Earl's woodpile. While other families burned 2 or 3 cords of wood each month, Earl was using less than one. His system used almost 60% less fuel while keeping the house 20 degrees warmer. Word spread quickly across the valley. Builders, farmers, and homesteaders came to see the strange metal-covered cabin for themselves. Some copied the idea exactly, placing cabins inside Quonset huts. Others built outer wooden shells around their homes. Some added double walls or enclosed wind barriers. The designs varied, but the principle remained the same. Stop the wind, trap still air, let physics do the rest. Within a few years, variations of the idea spread across Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Even in parts of Alaska, builders experimented with double-wall cabins and protective shells. Earl Hutchkins never tried to patent the design. He never wrote articles or gave lectures. He simply lived quietly in his warm cabin, answering questions whenever curious builders stopped by. Over time, the design stopped being unusual. It became just another frontier building technique. Because on the frontier, pride and tradition mattered less than results. And what mattered most was simple. Whatever worked. Earl Hutchkins had discovered that survival in brutal winters wasn't about bigger fires or thicker walls. It was about smarter design, about stopping heat loss before it ever started. The men who once laughed at the strange metal shell eventually built similar structures themselves, because sometimes the best ideas sound crazy at first, until winter proves them right.